Hello and welcome to Stock and Roll, the podcast where we deep dive into the world of equity compensation. Today we have two incredible guests from Deloitte joining us, Lucy Hovland and Anita Grant, both with tons of experience and know-how on designing equity programs. In today's episode, that excites me a lot, we're exploring broad-based plans, from understanding your strategical goals to managing legal complexities and ensuring effective communication across diverse workforces. So let's dive into why launching a broad program, how to launch, tax, and so much more. Stay tuned. Okay, we're here for another episode of Stock and Roll. Super happy to be at the office in London with Deloitte and Lucy Hovland and Anita Grant. Today's topic, we will dive a bit into global plans, but more or less more focusing on the broad-based schemes. So if we start off with, of course, letting you introduce yourself a bit first, but eager to jump into. But Lucy, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Lucy Hovland. I'm a director in our equity and incentives practice. I specialise in working with international companies who are private but have a global footprint, sort of scale, generally in the lead up to IPO, through IPO, and then once they're listed. So really love working with companies who are in the fast growth space, sort of techs and fintechs, who tend to operate broad-based plans.
And you're a lawyer?
And I'm a lawyer, yes, by way of background. I am a lawyer. Anita always says, don't hold that against me. And we don't hold it against you that you're an accountant.
Yes. So I'm Anita. I lead the Deloitte equity and incentives practice. I am an auditor by background. So it means I'm an accountant. I'm also a tax advisor. So between us, we cover the spectrum of things we need to do when we support our clients with designing, driving performance, implementing share plans.
Cool. And who and your team, is it like if you were to help a company, 2,000 people, soon to IPO, how many kind of people on the Deloitte team? Is it you, or do you kind of include more people typically?
I mean, gosh, lots more people. So I would say we have over 100 people at Deloitte who do this in the UK.
Yeah.
If we were to look around the globe, there's probably 600 of us. So the UK is definitely the biggest part, but big practices around Europe as well. Yeah. I would say the real difference for Deloitte is that pretty much anything you need to do to bring to life an incentive plan, that's what our team do. So we draft rules, we do global due diligences, we are creative and come up with new plans. We have people who do communications strategy. So anything we can do, which means we have to work with lots of other people in our team to deliver to our clients.
Yeah, so we'll have a few people holding like the key client relationship and looking after the client, but we have a really broad team with lots of specialisms, and so that really helps, particularly with some of sort of like our clients who are sort of time poor, and are trying to deal with lots of different responsibilities, that they can just come to us and we can say, like, here is the project plan and we can work on all these things. But we're also, we also work with lots of other advisors as well, particularly around IPOs. There'll be other advisors involved, and we always work in a sort of collaborative way in that way, and including with sort of like third-party providers as well, who, are sort of integral in this sort of ecosystem.
That's interesting. Yeah, and definitely like Deloitte as a brand kind of covering all jurisdictions and knowing that it's quite solid. I guess that's an advantage as well.
But we do work with lots of other advisors. So we work often with Tapestry, we work with Linklaters, work with Slaughter. So although we have a team of lawyers, we also work with law firms. We work with all of the administrators. And actually, for our clients, it's really important that you've got a series of advisors that can hold hands together to deliver something. So even though we can do it all, we don't always do everything for our clients because we work shoulder to shoulder with other advisors. And that works really, really well for all of us.
Cool. Today's topic is broad-based plan, basically including a lot of people into different plans. But more specifically, like what would you say, what is a broad-based plan, and what sort of instruments typically goes into a broad-based plan from a high level first?
So I think I think traditionally, at least from a UK perspective, when we were looking at broad-based plans, we would be thinking about the UK tax advantage plans that were sort of put in place by the government. So sort of SAYE and SIP. But increasingly, with the the global sort of talent space and the sort of companies we're working with, we're seeing other types of all-employee plans being used that are genuinely being offered on an all-employee basis to participants, but it's in a sort of an opt-in kind of basis. You know, so there's still sort of an opt-in to participating. But then we've got other clients who are philosophically want something that is completely all-employee and broad-based, but they want to be able to differentiate. So they might be using RSUs or option programs for all employees at all levels in all jurisdictions as much as possible. So we see a huge variety. And this is sort of where, so when you sort of, a client comes to you and they want to put in place a broad-based plan, there isn't one size fits all. And there are so many questions that we would ask in sort of that early stage of the design process to try and work out.
In fact, actually, where you tend to see real differentiators is a fast growth young company may look at things entirely different to a really mature business who wants to roll out globally. Really, because you're doing it for different reasons. One may be retention, one may be attraction because everybody else is doing it, but in a stable, mature employment market. One may be, I need to get the right people on board now because we're going to go do something fabulous, and how do I attract them? And I think that the reason for doing the plan massively influences structure, size, how it works, when things vest, who's eligible.
I think that why, we always say start with the why, and it's the kind of first question. Even if a company comes to us and says we want this type of plan, we will kind of try and take a step back from that and say, okay, tell us why you want that type of plan, because sometimes there can be a disconnect between the type of plan that they think they want and actually what they want to achieve. And that why, that purpose is so important. It will drive so many decisions all the way along down the line, not just the design of the plan, but actually even down to, you know, will we offer in this jurisdiction and how will we offer in this jurisdiction? That purpose point and what leadership really think about that is integral.
That leadership point is really important, isn't it? So we have a client, mature company, who the CEO wanted to do this plan here, which was probably the hardest version of a global plan, global all-employee plan that they could do. But he was fixated on it, wasn't he? And the consequence of that, actually, and then getting brilliant participation it's really quite challenging. But if you have got a very senior stakeholders whose mind's eye is focused, zoomed in on something, going back to the question of why are you doing this can be quite challenging.
And I think sometimes then you have to sort of, you know, tease that through. And sometimes that is still, you know, you might look at why, and that may still be the right, that may absolutely still be the right answer. Or the why might open up other broader discussions about the kind of the best route forward. So we like that kind of early stage sort of part of the design process. And our kind of ideal approach there is to bring as many stakeholders into the room from the business as we can at that early stage, particularly for broad-based plans. Things are a little bit different when you're looking at sort of like a senior-based LTIP, but for the broad-based plans, you know, we'll bring in stakeholders from, you know, reward, obviously, but sort of legal, tax, internal comms, if they have an internal comms department, treasury. I mean, and some, you know, employee representatives sometimes as well. I mean, just a really broad group of people. The best projects that we have seen run operate because there's been early consultation and people are therefore bought into the process. And it's not, you know, reward of kind of doing the heavy lifting generally, but you need the buy-in from everybody else for something like this to take off. But the other key voice that you really need to ensure you've got at that early stage is from your senior leaders. And we have sort of run workshops sometimes where we will do the interviews beforehand with senior leadership.
Yeah. And they are the most fun, right? When you get an opportunity to do a workshop with all of the interested senior people and get to listen to them why they're really doing this. That, I mean, can be quite tense, but probably the most fun part of a project for us. Being able to influence and persuade and shape something from scratch. In many ways, when a client comes with a fully formed view, you're like, oh, okay.
And this is sort of like, this is, you know, how is the company going to run this? Is, you know, sometimes actually those workshops will be with a smaller group of stakeholders who themselves will, you know, the reward team and other, will take that back to leadership themselves. But, you know, we're always keen to ensure that we've got that viewpoint in the room and under discussion to stop the time being wasted. Really.
I think, like, I remember once when I was involved in a company that was supposed to design a broad-based investment plan, and then they were very on like, okay, we want everyone to invest because we want them to have skin in the game, and everyone should invest about
philosophically. Totally get that.
Yes, and then there was like, okay, the level that they should invest is like, let's say, £5,000 a year, because that's something they should do. And then we kind of dived a bit deeper into it. It's like, who do you really want to do this for? And that was typically like the young talents. And then, okay, do the young talents have 5,000 extra per year that they can do, right? Or do you actually, so down the road there, you kind of found out that, yes, they wanted this because the skin in the game is important. But if you really want to kind of retain and motivate the younger people, you may kind of exclude suddenly like 80% of the people just because of the design, right? So it's just like, I remember that was, they went off really, really well in the start. And it was also kind of nice when we kind of managed to pivot that over to do like some sort of RSUs for those in addition or something that kind of created a bit.
It's a real, I think that is a real challenge right now, generationally, actually. So for most of the younger generation, we sit here as getting old people now, most of the younger generation who we work with, and therefore our clients, employee base, getting on the mortgage house ladder is really, really challenging. So asking them to put skin in the game when they're not even saving for a pension yet.
No.
They're saving for a deposit to buy a house and come in and have skin in the game. And actually that is very different to 20 years ago, where it was easier to get on the housing ladder. But I also think that culturally and socially, the views around work are very, very different to 20 years ago. And that does impact plan design.
It does.
I think, you know, the kind of how long someone will stay in a role, you know, in before they'll move on to the next job or the next company and what have you. Like, you know, some of the UK tax advantage plans, particularly when there's been sort of hard lobbying of government over two governments to kind of you get into great sort of tax reliefs, but only after 3 years or 5 years. So we're trying to pull that back so that you kind of get into a better tax relief position earlier on, because that's going to be more attractive for the young. And then it kind of better from a sort of, you know, a financially sort of enabling perspective will help people save up for things.
Definitely.
But, you know, think about some of our clients who have done these plans at really low share prices. And you're talking people are able to finally get their deposit for our house. They've made, I mean, some of our clients have done hundreds of thousands of pounds on an all-employee basis because of the right time, right place, right contribution, right share price growth. I mean, these things can change lives.
Definitely. And it's also like when pensions are not really helping out that much anymore, and that sort of gap, it can really be. So I think that's one of the cool things to do. But like in terms of people, of course that depends a bit, but it kind of goes a bit in the word of a broad-based plan includes many people. But is it everyone? Do you think all jurisdictions? Is it people that have been there for 6 months before you're eligible? What you see is kind of common, because these things are questions that often occur. Like how broad do you go?
So this is a really good question. So I think on the eligibility in terms of time, we have seen clients take quite different approaches here. There is, you know, at one end we've seen clients sort of ask even for as much as 18 months service before you can participate, or to have gotten past your probation period, however long that is. And I think the probation period can make sense. At the other end of the scale, we've got clients who will want to do grants the minute somebody's through the door to kind of make them feel, from an inclusion perspective, to make them feel part of the team. I think that probably sits more in the kind of tech kind of space.
But won't they, if it's RSUs, you will lose it anyhow if you leave, right?
And often they have a 1-year cliff. Sort of quite in certain sectors, quite a sort of typical pattern of vesting that you see. But I think, on the kind of more traditional all-employee plans, let's talk about like a typical kind of ESPPP, so or a global purchase plan. Yeah. They can run on much shorter cycles. And I think our clients there possibly maybe have the kind of first 6 months you're not participating, but I think increasingly that's disappearing. Partly because you forfeit in a lot of cases anyway. On the geographies that you include, I think that's where it starts to get really interesting. I mean, I think there's two things there. Firstly, I think there's one particular approach that clients often sort of look at. You sort of start off with a kind of a perspective that it will be all employee, but depending on the type of plan that you're rolling out, it may be really difficult to operate that plan in that jurisdiction. And so the question then becomes, what is the cost benefit of doing this? And is there do you have an employee cutoff? If you're offering it on a kind of an opt-in participatory basis, is there a cutoff? So a lot of, maybe companies might have a cutoff. If it's below 50 employees, they're not going to do it because the legal and tax costs and payroll cost of trying to operate this is so complicated. So that's sort of one thing. But sometimes the kind of complexity of operating in a jurisdiction is so hard, and the cost is so high, that number might lift much further. So I think the kind of common example is China, where I think typically our clients, the clients we have who do operate on a share, like not on a kind of phantom synthetic basis in China, but operate with real shares, probably around 400 people. But, we do know that there's kind of quite a high demand in China for equity. So, participants are really interested, but it's, the exchange, the cost of exchange control, the filings, the registration, tax is really complicated. And actually on an ongoing basis, not just the first registration, it's on an ongoing basis that's hard to administer. Puts a lot of burden on the in-house teams to kind of keep running that.
I remember it was a case that's also a while ago, but when we wanted to do a plan for or an equity plan, purchase or actually savings plan for all employees globally, many of these kind of countries that they would come from was Iraq, Yemen, Oman, and it was like the chairman of the board was from that area as well. And it was very hard to do equity there, or maybe impossible. So then the thought was, okay, let's do it synthetic for those regions. And then I remember like in the last turn, it was like, let's do it synthetic for everyone, because that would be making it equal. But I remember like how hard it was just to kind of try to find out how can we start giving them equity in a listed company that was listed in a European stock exchange. So that was like just diving into it. And then of course the synthetic version in that case is much easier. Of course you can then say that why don't the Europeans necessarily they couldn't get shares, right? But I think that's a tough.
And I think this is why you start with your philosophy of what do you want to achieve, and then you kind of set your boundaries as to how you'll kind of apply this across geographies. What are your kind of break points that will mean that you'll say actually that's we're going to have to flip here into doing something different or not at all. And if that happens, what do we do? And I think that's sort of a stage in the process. But like, when you're looking at a really big global all-employee rollout, like the other thing that we see companies do is not do all of the geographies at once. And, don't bite off more than you can chew. Even the biggest companies, like doing a big broad-based rollout, particularly of the sort of like the purchase plan, as sort of that kind of is really complex.
We're in the midst of doing a multiple 100,000 plan at the moment, trying to do that across 70 countries. That's such it's organisationally a big shift, and unless you have a really big stock team, how do you manage that internally? Which is why most companies will do a phased approach. Otherwise, the money you're spending and the output value from it just doesn't seem to work. And we should make sure we talk about employee comms at some point here, because the real thing for me that makes a difference is how you communicate this with your employees. All this brilliant work with smart people creating something fabulous, and nobody understands. And that we've seen can make a real difference, can't it? To changing culture, engagement, driving participation, just making a difference, which is really the point of all employee plans. But if you don't do comms in a way that really speak to people, then you run the risk of failing,
I agree. And I think the first part of that is first making it simple enough so it's easy to understand, so you don't kind of make it too complex and too much strange stuff here. And then when that is done, really try to make it, put a lot of effort into making sure that people understand it. I think pickup rates is always important, right? And having people that are not necessarily used to sit in an office and work with finance, and it's a different way of communicating to that sort of,
I think so. And sort of alongside that, if you're looking at on a global basis, having champions in kind of regions or countries becomes really important to drive the project forward and own it in that place. And I think sometimes if you've got when you're looking at a global rollout, if you've got a really strong champion who's not just on board with it, but almost agitating for it in their jurisdiction, that can kind of make a big difference. If you put that kind of regional geography into your phase one rollout, and that leads to success of the plan, that kind of means that in other jurisdictions that perhaps might be smaller, have smaller groups of people, that they hear about it and they hear about the success, and then they want to participate as well. So you kind of get the kind of internal kind of sort of buy-in from that kind of hearing the stories.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's also in terms of communication. It's possible to make it as similar as possible across kind of different jurisdictions, and it's easier to also communicate the same message, because obviously it's easy to try to make something for that country because there it works and there that works and there that works. That kind of leads me a bit to next question. So local differences if you do a global plan. Obviously, it's very difficult to make it the best ideal for all countries. But let's say if you're a UK company, of course, SAYE plans are big. What do you do with people outside of UK? Do you do UK here? Do you do nothing? Do you do the same?
She knew I was going to say this. And I think rolling out SAYE globally is super difficult. Super, 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 super difficult. It's the most common UK all-employee plan still. I am a massive fan of share incentive plan, and that is a very different risk profile, but strangely easier to roll out. I would say the most common plan to roll out globally looks much more like the US ESPP. Shorter savings times. It's that holding funds overseas is a real issue for lots of organisations, and lots of administrators, trustees, facilitators can't hold money where they need to. So we might love saving for things, buying shares, but practically doing that can be really, really difficult.
Yeah, so the models where you've got sort of a discounted purchase, which is the US model, or a co-invest, which is the kind of UK SIP model, kind of work well, and they often, I think, speak well to shareholders as well. It's the short, but also it's the shorter period of time saving. I think when you trying to get people these days to save for 3 years, 5 years, it can be really challenging. And if you've got a difficult country to hold funds in, that makes it even harder. Yeah.
But yet we're still, in the UK, we're still not seeing as many share incentive plans implemented.
But I think there's a different risk profile, isn't there? And although it's so, the sort of SIP works by you're purchasing in the UK, you're purchasing out of gross pay rather than net pay. That gives you a buffer, so you purchase shares, and then you can get a match, and the match is can be done on a up to 2-for-1 basis.
Yeah.
Within a kind of tax relieved basis. And if you hold those shares for as long as 5 years, you get to a completely tax free position. But you can set shorter holding periods and shorter forfeiture periods.
But like a company
it's complex.
Yeah, it's complex. But a company then with 2,000 people, 1,000 in UK and 1,000 in US, you would do both?
So where there are definitely organisations that will say to you, where I can make this tax efficient, please do it.
Yeah.
And almost always you would do something in the UK and the US. Almost always.
Yeah.
Outside those two populations, possibly with the exception of France, because France approved qualified plans are just so common and expected. Outside that, probably very limited differentiation.
Yeah.
What you do find across, particularly across a number of European jurisdictions, is that there's a tax relief that's available. So it may be a sort of no or a minimal adjustment that has to be made to benefit from that tax relief. You may not have to do anything, but you do need to communicate it to your participant or make sure that the company knows that they can avail themselves of that tax relief. So, but I think those are but
I guess it's
France, UK.
And I guess it's some sort of like a breaking point here where it's like complexity versus tailoring, because obviously like if it's a lot of people in one jurisdiction, you may need to look into it, but if you do too much, it will end up too complex. And if you have 7 countries and kind of you can't have 7 different plans if it's 50 people in all countries.
I think that's right. I think, you're always really looking at where are the bulk of your people going to be who will participate in this plan. Yeah. And so, if that's not UK, you're not going to think about the UK types of plans. You're going to think about what works best in your top 3 jurisdictions, and make sure that it works there and speaks to those participants. Yeah. Because there's also cultural differences and expectations as well. And we find, although this is changing, we find, historically in certain geographies, we might say, actually, people don't want shares, to cash is king. Yeah. And then it kind of you get into a kind of, where are we kind of leadership is like, philosophically, we want this to be share ownership. And we're like, well, this may affect participation. Yeah. But, but that you hold the line on shares. Yeah. But in other companies, they might say, okay, we hear you. We want this to be a kind of a component of reward. Yeah. And therefore we're going to give on that philosophical position and we'll move to cash. So
let's think about this. Why do you just said something there. Why do people implement share plans? Because we want them to become shareholders. How often do we see most people, normal people, just sell the shares on vesting? Yeah. Yeah. And then you are really getting into that reward incentive dynamic, and not we're all in it together. We're not changing culture. This is about adding to somebody's pay packet. And again, in a world where people are struggling financially and want to get onto the housing ladder or save for other things, cashing out the minute that the shares vest, it honestly is not uncommon. No. Now, you obviously have your more senior people with more disposable income or shareholding guidelines that will hold and wait. Yeah. But the more junior you go, the more you tend to see people sell immediately. Yeah. And that's a real dichotomy, isn't it? Because we are, when the CEO sits down and says, I want to do this, I want everybody to participate in this, I want us all to go along and change this business and drive it forward. And after 3 years, we sell the shares. It's really hard, isn't it? Because it just doesn't necessarily sit nicely together. Nope. But I think then the communications around that, we're still participating in success. It's just sometimes that ends earlier for some people than others. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's like, if it's a 3-year vesting, until that time, you're anyhow kind of for those 3 years.
Yeah. And then, during that 3-year period, I think there's often a missed communication. Yeah. Sort of during that 3-year period, how much is a company continuing to communicate about the success of this plan, or how the contribution and things like that. So
you touched upon communication area. I think it's interesting. How do you communicate if it's going down? So like, it's easy to say, okay, let's kind of, okay, it's going well, we're having a new quarterly presentation, we're pushing out, like, this is the changes, you do that. Like do you see someone also transparent, saying very, very open when it's going down, or is it a difference on how companies communicate when it goes up or down?
I mean, it is so very unique and personal to organisations. But I will say, of late, I've been involved with some SOYE comms where the share price on an old set of plans and the new set are quite different, and talking to employees about what you might want to consider about whether you're joining this plan as opposed to this plan with the limits that you have got. How do you think about which plans to remain into? And that's really hard because you can't cross a line on giving financial advice. But there is also an obligation to set out to employees what this actually means. You're in a plan with a share price of £17 and the share price is 3 today. What do you do? But actually, I've done some communications with clients recently on that, just because the financial education aspect of it. And I would say financial education at the moment is a really hot topic for employers. These things are so closely linked. So I would say most people don't ignore, but that crossing the line, financial advice is really hard.
Yeah, definitely. But I also think, like, seen some examples as well where periods where everything is going really well, it's very easy to just kind of talk about the opportunity. And now I mean especially like investment programs or saving programs, right? And I think that's obviously we're rigged to, and we want to talk about that. But I think, like, when it comes to broader plans and call it like the more blue collar workers you have, and so it's even more important to remember the need of and it's not like disclaimer below saying that no, that this may be of high risk or shares are of high risk. In fact, you need to be able to do that as well, because it's I think it's always hard, but I think the best I see is good that really 50-50 communication, but still like trying to and I think like the learning part is super important, because then they do more qualified decisions.
The learning part is really important, but recognizing how people learn differently brings a real challenge. So I am of a generation where I just want to read something. We have definitely lots of people who we communicate with who want to see videos and what they want to do sound bites. I mean, it drives me mad. But people absorb information in such totally different ways. So just having posters up or an old-fashioned, remember we did old-fashioned FAQs? Those type of things work for some people, but actually having interactive PDFs and videos can attract a whole different generation of people. And knowing when to invoke those different things, and again, to make the most of this plan, I think is really, really important.
No, I agree. When designing programs, who's involved? So like if you talk to a client, a company, is it a lot of people involved? I understand this is also dependent on like size and who. Is it CFO or the financial side of it? Is it the legal? Is it the HR? Is it the owner? Is it everyone? Or just kind of get some info on it?
Totally depends what type of size organisation you're talking about. So in our largest, most mature organisations at an all-employee level, you tend to be talking to HR. And then you'll get sign-offs at board levels as appropriate. If you are talking about fast growth, want to do something exciting, you'll be sat in the room with the CEO, the CFO, the chairman. I mean, it's entirely different depending on the stage organisation.
It really does vary. And I think, as we sort of said earlier, there are different perspectives, and you need a project, you need that kind of owner as well, and the project lead, and who that sits, where does share plans sit? It kind of really varies within organisations. I think typically within a listed organisation, you're going to have a reward specialist who's, and share plans is sitting under that. But we've Sometimes it's with COSEC.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's with finance. It just changes, and therefore the owner changes as well.
Yeah.
But I would say the best projects for ease of implementation start off with all of the right people in the room to begin with.
Yeah.
Because that initial socialization on why, design alternatives, cost.
Yeah.
If you don't capture all of those views from the start, somebody will get blindsided.
Do you sometimes advise also on who to join, or is it that kind of just comes naturally?
We will encourage. So when we say this is our sort of kind of proposed approach, and we talk about the design workshop, we will often say bring in these people, bringing in someone as well as your sort of reward kind of people leads, bring in someone from legal and COSEC, bring in someone from finance, bring in someone from payroll. Like, it's really important.
That payroll point is actually really important. The amount of problems we see when payroll are not involved.
We have had big global all employee plans that have sort of been trailed by sort of CEOs in town halls, stalled because global payroll actually isn't ready. And that's a really critical issue that you need to overcome first. Like, you can't have payroll or in a state of transformation and then suddenly throw in a big equity plan process. So nobody's going to like you for that.
I remember back, like, also long back in time, but there was a client that was in very, call it like launched the program a bit too fast. Payroll wasn't really kind of onboarded, and I remember I was hired in to help out on the payroll side, because it's like kind of many different jurisdictions, different currencies, and you're deducting in a savings plan, and then there's currency changes along the way, and then you're suddenly acquiring shares, and then there's residuals, and there's exchanges between, and it can be very, very difficult, and people are leaving and you're buying back, and so that part is probably one of the most complex ones when you kind of include a lot of people.
I think so. And so having those key stakeholders in the room at an early stage means that they will start thinking and firing off questions that are thinking more about operation, and that can help you inform design. It won't stall it, but helps you inform, and also helps you inform the project plan. What are those people worried about, so that you can build that into the entire project plan. Something that we do a lot of, sort of for kind of these kind of big global rollouts, but also for companies who are going through IPO. So it's a big shift in how the equity plan has got to be operated. We do these process workshops, which are honestly quite dry. But it's so that we can bring everyone together and in one sort of space and period of time work through all the nuts and bolts.
And their obligations, this is what you're going to have to do.
Which can throw up all the questions.
Which brings me, when you are rolling out equity overseas and you have a really mobile population, global equity, mobile people, tax, payroll don't know what they're supposed to be doing. The level of compliance risks you bring into that organisation is quite massive. And if you think about the times when we're talking about our equity tax withholding tool, getting payroll in early to understand their obligations, and that tax authorities expect you to track these people and to pay tax in multiple jurisdictions, and payroll, what are you going to do about that? That can completely throw up red lights.
Definitely. And on the external side, so that's the internal side, like who you work with, who are the typical stakeholders, and obviously like Deloitte coming in, and you have a lot of kind of internal expertise there as well. But what sort of other partners? So again, here, 2,000 people in a company, someone calls you saying, we need to launch a plan. We're already listed, let's say that. But like, what other partners do we need? Are there anyone else we need to kind of call, and at what stage?
So we would always say early consultation with administrator is really critical. Like, it may be but one I think, so honestly, we haven't talked about sort of what you've got your design, and we've talked about sort of talked about tax and legal, but actually is cost.
Yeah.
You can come up with a fantastic design, but when you start to model the costs, it becomes too expensive. But one of the big parts of the cost is going to be your administration, your cost of running the plan. So you need your administrator, and you need to understand what your administrator can bring to the table and the kind of functionality of the system, the interface for the participant, and what that offers as part of the experience for the participant. So I think that's a kind of a critical kind of attendee. They may not be in all of the workshop, but they should definitely be in the process part of the workshop. Once, because by that point they will definitely have been selected. We do sometimes see companies, if they're doing a global plan, may use a different administrator to the administrator who's been running their LTIP. Because they sort of need a different functionality and kind of experience.
Getting trustees on board really early. Trusting them to be able to work with all of the other sides. Which it's not, this is everyday stuff, but actually getting them onboarded early. If you've never used a trust before, understanding what it means legally, understanding what it means from an accounting perspective. If this is the first time you've ever looked at that vehicle, that can blow minds.
And I think that the use of a trust is very it's very common for a UK company, but not as common,
not common
or
elsewhere.
necessary elsewhere. So, like sometimes when we're working with a company that's headquartered in a different jurisdiction, part of our learning and understanding will be, well, how does this work when you haven't got a trust? How does this operate? So that then we'll be sort of bringing in like local specialists and making sure that we fully understand that. Like, what is the ecosystem there?
I think this trust part is one of the things that we, from our side, kind of see that is very, very, very important to know a lot about, because it's like you may have different jurisdictions. Some places you need like individual accounts. Some places you can just use a trust. Sometimes you need to use a trust, but that trust needs to be a local trust. And then it's like, okay, then you'll kind of just get the ball starting to roll, right? And kind of start that planning fast. Because obviously if you can put everything in one trust, it's so much easier for participants, and everything is so much easier. But it's like knowing that, and we've seen some some perfect example of when it's working, and also some perfect examples of when it's super tough to find that setup that actually works.
Yeah, this is where it's interesting, kind of working on a global basis. The sort of, we know how it can work with the UK topco, but the peculiarities, I suppose, from a learning perspective of how, making this type of plan work when you've got Luxembourg topco, which is, it's hard to issue shares quickly. How do we make this work? So it's those kind of troubleshooting that we're looking at. Once you need to have that understanding at quite an early stage in terms of the planning, and you're planning, you get the kind of modelling costs, and then you have these have a long implementation phase where you're kind of troubleshooting and working through.
Definitely.
Can you imagine if you've never even planted equity before, and you're big and you're rolling out globally, the amount of education you have to do internally shouldn't be underestimated.
Nope.
Your finance team don't understand accounting for share-based payments. They don't understand what a trust is or how you account for that. They don't know what pushing down costs mean. They don't know about recharges. They don't understand the payroll implications. I mean, the education internally for the very first time is significant.
Yeah. It is.
And that's after design. This is just teaching people what's going to change in their day jobs. And one of the brilliant things is a lot of the administrators now have a financial reporting functionality pack on it. And that really makes life easier for our clients, because you can buy that piece, you can put it on, and finance know they've got the reporting, it's there. But pre that, the accounting for share plans is actually quite difficult.
I think tech has really changed this as well. Like kind of if you go back to Anita and I have been in the game for a long time, but where it was all paper and we had to, we do mail mergers to create like thousands of documents and things like that, and you have your analyst or your trainee kind of doing that later through the night,
Well,
and pay, wet signatures. It's so different. The kind of functionality, being able to run it through the portal, of an administrator portal, or sometimes some of our clients have even sort of built on the front of that something even sort of more spectacular.
Definitely. I agree. I think that's it's one of the things, like kind of coming from a world where we did things like this, and then being able to be part of building that tech side as well. I think it's just amazing. And I think, like, let's wait another 5 years and see how things are now, right? Then I think that's just
I've seen clients starting to use AI and things, and it's really interesting.
It's super interesting. Are there any kind of big typical traps? This is a big question and hard to kind of get around in a kind of a very short amount of time. But let's say back to kind of the case where you're not so known, or you haven't really done this before, and you're doing 2,000 people quite globally. Are there like a couple of, be aware of at least these two things? What's the most likely
US taxpayers?
Yeah.
US taxpayers. I think US taxpayers, like we have quite a lot of clients who don't have a US footprint but have a problem with their US taxpayers, because the kind of the you are taxable on your worldwide income, and combined with the horrors of Section 409A rules, which kind of can impose penalty taxes around deferred compensation, the pitfalls they can walk into can be quite hard to unravel. So I think that's one of my earliest, most common questions. And we have certain jurisdictions that we will watch for or ask about. So Canada is another one. China is a common one. And what we quite often do is we'll just sort of get a list of countries and sort of think about it like a heat map.
I think
it tends to be the legal, securities, regulatory aspects that are harder than the tax, or you can trip up on more easily than the tax. I mean, most tax authorities,
the tax
remuneration, I'm going to tax you. It's the legal side that people can forget about. Or, I mean, how often do we see exchange control? How often do we see people are not employees, and the legal and tax ramifications of trying to give equity to these special humans who don't full-time work for you as employees in a world where people don't work like we used to. And most of our tax rules and securities rules and regulatory rules don't recognise the workforce is different. And capturing those people early becomes really, really important.
We see an increased use of third-party employer of record companies, and like when that first started to come about, and you had sort of a worker engaged by the third-party employer of record, and then providing the employer of records providing the services of that person.
Does that basically mean you're employed with this kind of employer of record, and not the company?
Not the company. So you can't participate in the employee equity program. And at this early start of that kind of arising, it was often that you flipped to cash, and the employer of record companies didn't want to deal with equity. That's changing. But actually there is still a lot of tax complexity, and there's still a lot of legal complexity with that you have to think about. But also the real issue is that it's, in some ways the securities law aspects are relatively stable, but different to the employee. The real issue is that the tax viewpoints of the kind of the local tax authority is burgeoning all the time and evolving. So you have to watch that more closely than you would have to watch for an employee, I think, which sort of we've got quite sort of generally quite stable rules. We hear about the changes coming through, it's well publicised.
Generally stable rules, but in a world where workers look really different to 20 years ago, but our tax and regulatory and security, all of the rules that govern this are arguably not appropriate for a different kind of workforce. And I mean, that's actually some of the challenges that we put in to the Treasury when we went to speak to the Treasury. How do you incentivize people who don't look like an old-fashioned employee? And actually, really important to success of a company growing, where you're hiring brains, not necessarily a pair of hands, but brains and ideas and time, and you want them to have affinity with you, but they're not your normal employee because they're working in lots of different ways. Our rules globally don't know how to deal with those kind of people, but they are such an important part of the workforce now. And no real focus. Economically, most countries are struggling at the moment. This is low down on their list, but actually, it's a really important way that people work.
Yeah. No, I think we had one example in Norway. Of course, me being a bit close to Norway, but where it was a new kind of very positive tax change that came, but it was a kind of a sentence in that that was saying that it's only for it only comes into account if you're getting kind of the shares or the grants in the employer company. And then it's like,
that word is going to become a challenge,
company, right? And then it's just like, what if you work with this fully owned subsidiary? And that was the problem. That was the problem because then you're not kind of eligible suddenly. And that was how. So it was like
it was often.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, employer company, at least 25 hours. There's a lot of these kind of wordings, which is a bit like, I understand where it comes from, but it can ruin a bit of these things. And especially this employer company, like if you have a fully owned subsidiary, but you just split out IP in one, and then suddenly you're disqualified, and that was like an error, I'd say, in the tax legislation and how it kind of came out. Now it wasn't even the draft; it's there now. So it's not a draft. So not a draft. It's fine. So this is the thing where everyone's like, be careful with this because then you need to, and you can't really grant in a subsidiary that doesn't really have. So this is
it's a pitfall. Yeah,
it's a pitfall. Yeah. We touched a bit upon US tax, but like generally, if you go a bit back to the broad-based programs, like culture for broad-based programs in US versus Europe, is it like any kind of high-level considerations, big differences, more popular, less popular, bigger programs, more rich programs, just any?
The US I think the US use of equity is what has completely changed equity use around the whole world. If you think about how many, and so the US started and it came to the UK, how many big listed companies, and the biggest listing authorities are probably US and UK, companies going globally, and we do this for our local employees, so why wouldn't we do that overseas? What happens is if you have a country with lots of subsidiaries of overseas companies, that sets the tone on pay. So then your domestic employers are in this position of, gosh, how do we attract people when this huge US inbound is offering equity as part of its package? And it really has changed the tone of around pay globally, that use.
I think within Europe, we, other than sort of like, I think what the game changer actually is the introduction of a tax qualified or advantage plan.
It's really exciting then, isn't it?
That's why you see kind of a sort of strong use of like equity settled plans in France, US and UK. And I think what we used to find when we, like this is going back 10 years maybe, when we went into, Europe for our clients and asked about, how would this be received? The answer, as I said, we often got was that cash was king. But I think I've seen that changing in the clients that I work with. And I think, and I think this is sort of, it's very prevalent as, from a tech perspective, it's really expected and demanded because there are some fantastic success stories of people who have kind of come in at an early stage and kind of really kind of, change in life transforming, and people want to be part of that story and kind of be along that journey. So I think it's changing significantly. And also you've started to see in certain countries the introduction, not necessarily for sort of like the listed company kind of all employee plan relief, so there may be a relief there, but you started to see the introduction of reliefs for startup companies. And I think that really changed things here when they introduced EMI. But we've seen that, we've seen more of those being introduced across Europe. And I think that's really exciting because I do love fast growth companies.
But I think the real challenge, if you think about something like EMI, the real challenge is you and I both know it takes more than 250 people to bring a brilliant idea to a really successful corporate. And yet our tax rules are still set in a world where life was really different. You quite quickly find yourself over your employee limit, over your threshold of size, and you're not ready to list yet. You're not ready to exit yet. There's still so much more to do. And I think that's part of the problem with tax qualified plans is a lack of understanding in local governments about what does it take to make a successful business. It takes a whole family to make a successful business, and the rules don't extend far enough to capture what you need to achieve. And again, that was another conversation we had at the Treasury. 250 people is nothing.
In Norway, it was 50 until like just a year ago. Now they've kind of extended it to 80 and then now 120. But still, it's
nothing.
It's
120 person company is tiny.
It is.
It's tiny.
It is.
You need those sort of those early stage plans, and then you need to kind of build up the net, and that's I guess we hope will happen across jurisdictions as you kind of create that kind of innovative entrepreneurial ecosystem, and that the kind of share plans can kind of create and grow with that. And if the governments can support with a tax relief as those companies become of scale, but it is taking it's taking longer it's much longer now, the time period for companies to list or to get to liquidity. So you're starting to see also big private companies that are doing other kind of liquidity events, like secondary markets, but often then the tax advantage plans, you would lose the relief if you participated. So it's an interesting.
And I think that's the point about the world. The world has changed so much. The economies are really difficult. Your businesses are much more complex. To be really successful in whatever that way of successful means, it looks really different to 30 years ago. But often our tax rules and our regulatory rules are steeped in some really old legislation that's arguably not suitable for 2025. But there's many other things that governments have got to worry about.
It is.
It's really, where do you draw the line on where they should be focusing when they've got lots of other things to focus on? But attracting entrepreneurs to a country, making them set up their business here, getting them to build a workforce that makes a difference. Can you imagine what you can do for a country when that happens?
Definitely.
But our rules everywhere just are not supportive enough for the fact that requires a lot of talent to do those type of things these days.
And I think like this is I'll call it startup and the growth side. It's like you really need to make it attractive to work with a startup because you have less job safety, you have longer hours, you have much more chaotic every day. And then it's like, okay, you have to drop salary from working in a company like Deloitte or a bank or whatever, right? And then going into a startup like that, you're stupid if you just look at it like Apple, right? And then you need something.
Yes, and to attract.
Yes, you need that.
Attract a arguably different type of person. From a risk perspective, where salary isn't the only thing, and the promise of something in a few years that is really tax efficient can be really attractive. When you're limited on the people that you can offer that to, you're building a two-tier workforce that brings other challenges in.
Agree. No, I think that topic as well is like for me like this. Really making it easier to go broader and more on the early stage companies to kind of do that. I think that's extremely important. And I think we see positive movements now. If you think like the last 5 years, review what happened like the 5 years before that, I think it's positive, but it's still a way to go in most jurisdictions, I think.
I mean, I will say all the time when like it takes a massive family to make an organisation successful. It doesn't take 2 people. It doesn't take 250 people. It takes a massive family to achieve something. And we're we're slow in adapting our rules and regulations to support a different way of businesses being successful.
I agree. Back to kind of, we touched a bit upon communication, but I think like still, what are the tools in communication that you would have used if you were a 2,000 people thing? Because I think that you can say letters, you can say emails, you can say town halls, videos, you can even do TikToks, or you can do, but how would you typically, like, simple, few, more?
I think it really depends on how big your budget is, because all of your employees are so individual and different. They all consume information in such different ways. So if you can stretch to different media types, you will touch more people.
Yeah.
But often when you are planning your new plan, often that employee communications bit comes too late to secure a budget for. And that is the bit that will have the biggest impact, is how you talk about it.
Yeah.
And those days of just putting posters up, I still see the posters, right? But people work hybrid now. Why would you have posters in an office?
Yeah,
That adds something else.
Yeah.
So I think the point here is multimedia.
Yeah.
Is that the right way to say? Many forms, multifaceted media in different forms can make the biggest difference.
Yeah.
The person you really need to talk to is Jane we have a communications consultancy called Stitch.
Yeah.
And
So
Jane
really Garlington is the person to speak to on this, because she, almost all of the work that Stitch do with us at Deloitte and with clients that we're not involved with are all employee plans where they are bringing to life something that is that point about strategically the business is going here. How can these employee comms support that? And they would talk about multifaceted, different types of communications that speak to different people, different languages, different media, using people's smartphones, using iPads, using laptops, avatars. Yeah, I mean, all those different ways of reaching different kinds of employees at different levels.
But I mean, I guess those are sort of looking at budgets. Like we've put in place sort of with some private companies who are launching their sort of first broad-based option plan, some communications that are, kind of on brand, kind of speaking to their people in the right way. The use of language is really important.
Yes.
And so there's sort of, that might be, I'm going to say it's a booklet or a kind of, but it's really important because it's communicates using a language and visuals that will speak to participants, and that'll be combined often with CEO kind of doing a kind of a town hall or kind of recording something. So it may be that there's sort of like something that's done professionally that is kind of support, but actually when you're doing that kind of thing, you really if budgets are tight, you look to sort of do it in a way that it has a lot of longevity, so that it can be used for every new recruit, but on an ongoing basis for people to refer back to and things like that. But then there's a lot that the company can do internally, with their champions, with the CEO speaking about it, that kind of thing that can help bring it to life and emphasize the importance for the company.
We've seen quite a lot of peer-to-peer communications recently. So finding, let's take you are an organisation with a huge factory presence. Finding somebody on the factory floor that can talk a language that their peers understand. I agree. So, a real change on peer-to-peer videos is happening.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, we did that recently.
Well, great. I think we've been covering a lot or most of the topics that we had there. I kind of feel that I want to ask even more questions, but I think we're kind of out of time, and it's better to then rather think about another podcast on communication or something else at a later stage. So I think I'll leave with that and say thanks a lot, both of you. I think this was super, super, super fun.
It was the best part of my day.
It was definitely the best part of my day.
And I'm looking forward to listening to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.